Hi everyone and welcome. Today is going to be a little different in terms of how I prepare the video. I spent an inordinate amount of time down in my wormery preparing for the movement of my ANCs, my African nightcrawlers, out of their two bins into new homes, and it just took forever, and I had so much footage I decided I was going to speed up the footage and play it back really quick and just provide voiceover info. Here you can see this was the age of the bins, 210 days and 185 days of age. So I wanted to demonstrate quickly what I was planning to do in order to try to leave the mites behind, because if you've been following along, you know that these bins were littered with mites. So here I'm depicting a situation where I'm estimating that I've got about 1,000 worms and probably thousands and thousands of mites among them. So, besides the bin that the worms are going to be going into, I've got a box over there depicted with a bunch of leaves in it. And I've also got a supply of DE, which is diatomaceous earth. So my idea was to take the ready-built bin, which has already got bedding and food in it, and then I would take some of the leaves that I bought from outside, but this time, since I'm suspicious that the leaves from outside are where the mites came from originally, I would take those leaves that I bought from outside and I would microwave them. So I put them into the microwave and zapped all the mites, and I put them in there for about 10 minutes, 2 5-minute sessions. So putting in layers of leaves and diatomaceous earth was meant to be sort of a filter in a way, so that once the worms get placed into the bins or into the bin, then the worms would be able to squirm down through the diatomaceous earth, down into the bedding and into the food, and the mites would get caught up in the diatomaceous earth, hopefully doing away with them. So I proceeded at that point to get my two systems out with the African nightcrawlers in them. I started with the younger system, which is in this plastic bin here, and I started into the whole light harvesting method, which is to use the bright lights overhead to cause the worms to dive down into the material, and then I grabbed a paintbrush with which I would skim off the top layer of material after the worms had already dove down. So before I could do that, I needed to make myself a little bit of space. So I push all the material off to the side. Yeah, gotta make some room. Push the material off to the side so that I got a little landing pad for the material that I'm going to scrape off the top. After this, it took a moment or two to let the worms dive down, but then I proceeded into the scraping of the worm-free material, scooping it up on each occasion and placing it into the sieve, or the sifter, basically. And the idea here was to try to capture all the little particles of leftover bedding, paper, food scraps, you name it. Luckily, the material itself, the castings, were nice and small, nice and fine, fairly dry, very easy to go through the sifter, leaving behind only little bits of paper and sticks and stems, and down within the red bucket was all the really nice castings, as well as a whole bunch of mites too, probably. So I went through this process, sifting through, pretty repetitive, over and over, and then eventually I decided, you know what, I've got two systems that need this treatment, and while I'm waiting for one system for the worms to dive down, I could just jump over and work on the other system. So after I got smart, I set up both systems so I could toggle back and forth between the two, and eventually I got to the point where I had gotten maybe about half of the material collected and screened through. I certainly had a lot more of it taken care of in the younger bin that I had started earlier. I was a little bit behind on the VERMIBAG tote, the older system. In that system, there was still a good amount of castings and worms and everything left. When I decided I was going to take a peek down underneath the plastic tubs. There's those two plastic tubs were one nested within the other, So I wanted to take a peek, and I ended up outside because the lower bin was full of mites, and I just wanted to get it out of the house. So I ran outside, and while I was out there, I had some thoughts about what to do next. So I came back, and I sort of changed my game plan. I spoke into the camera here for a little bit, explaining how I was going to abandon the whole light harvesting approach that I was using, and that I was going to switch over to plan B, which was to simply take all the remaining material in this bin, as well as what was remaining in the Vermibag tote, and simply empty it into the screen and see if I could just separate the worms from all of the material that they were inhabiting. So I went ahead, starting with the younger of the two bins, and I poured out its contents, and after a couple shakes, I was pretty much left with just a pile of worms. And I knew that since I hadn't really had a chance to do it the way I was doing previously, I knew that there would be a good amount of just, little bits of paper and sticks and stems, not too much, but I knew that there'd be some of that coming along with the worms, since that would also be caught up in the filter. And that was fine. I didn't worry too much about it. I knew there was very little of that in these systems anyway. And once I collected all the worms out of the younger system, I figured we would take a little bit of time to just watch them squirm. So I shot a little time-lapse footage of the worms doing their thing. And this is probably a good, 10, 15 minutes worth of time. I walked away. I took care of a couple things during this time. And then when I got back, I realized it was time to proceed to weighing the worms. So I went ahead, tried to remove a little bit more of the material that they were inhabiting, but it didn't really seem like it made a whole lot of difference. A couple scraps of paper, this and that, didn't really amount to much. So I just went ahead and took them, dropped them into a box, and threw them on the scale. So what I ended up with was, I believe, 11 ounces, and I forget how many grams. But yeah, I believe that the ultimate collection of worms out of the younger of the two systems was about 11 ounces. And that's including a little bit of the material that they were inhabiting. So if you take a sort of a 10% rule, maybe accounting for about 10 ounces of worms in that first system. So then I proceeded into the same process for the most part. Just trying to screen through the remaining material that was still in the Vermibag tote. There was a bit more here, so I had to go through a couple passes. And then this time, instead of doing it straight into the red bucket, I figured since I had a little bit more space, a little bit more room to do it right over the contents of the Vermibag tote, I would do it over there. So it took a couple tries, maybe 2 or 3 handfuls, 2 or 3 siftings. And eventually I got to the point where I felt like I'd pretty much gotten all the worms out of the Vermibag tote. And here too, I couldn't resist shooting a little bit of quick time lapse just to watch the worms squirm. So here too, I forget how much time this was, but I gave them a little bit of time just to squirm around. Because it's always fun to watch the worms do their thing, right? And after a while, I figured, okay, let's get these little guys out of the light. I was going to drop them into the box that the other worms were in. But first I would figure, I would try to remove some of the other stuff that was surrounding them, and I just abandoned that. I said, you know what, the heck with it. These worms are going to go with all the paper and the little food scraps and whatever else they were inhabiting at this point. I guess I was running out of patience. So I did the same thing here. Now we were weighing all of the worms, and as you could see, we're in excess of 2 pounds. Don't forget, you got to remember that the container itself is about 4 ounces too. So I believe that the estimate for how many worms we ended up collecting was somewhere between 1.5 and 1 3/4 pounds. And now it was time to get onto the new bin that I had built for these worms. So I went in there with some fresh dry leaves that I sprinkled out on the top surface, and then I proceeded into my creation of this mite intercepting concoction, which was a layer of dry leaves, a layer of diatomaceous earth, another layer of dry leaves, another layer of diatomaceous earth, and then in went the worms. So here again, as I normally do, I'm showing the worms squirming and getting acclimated and making their way down into their new home. And eventually, after who knows how long this took, it was probably a good 30 minutes I gave them, because during this time I went away, I washed a bunch of things, you know, and then it was time to christen the bin, put on its label, and it was time to be done. I figured I was going to handle the whole dealing with the compost that all the cocoons were in at another time. I'll probably get to it tomorrow, but I was pretty much out of steam and it was time to call it a day. So this is my quickie playback version of what I did today, dealing with my 2 African nightcrawler bins, trying to get them out of their mite-infested environment and into a new home. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated, and also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.